Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Back to Srimad Bhagavatam with a little break from Ram Navami and all of that. So we're continuing Canto 11, Chapter 9. We're going to continue with text 16. I'll read text 16, which we discussed 2 days ago. And be ready for some philosophy. Probably it's good to do a little briefing ahead of time. There's terminology in what we're going to be reading that's pretty simple, but it does take a little, language, understanding. The two terms are upadan and nimitta. Upadan and nimitta. You can read in more detail if you like in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it discusses the Advaita Acharya and the Panchatattva. He's called the material cause of creation. Doesn't mean he's material, it means he's cause of the ingredients. So there's this upadan, it is picture in your mind. Was thinking to show an image on the screen, but it's easy. Picture in your mind someone making pots at a potter's wheel. The clay undergoes transformation. It's a lump, and then it becomes a pot. That's upadan. Then there's the nimitta, which causes the pot to go from clay to a pot. That's nimitta, the instrument. And there's two different categories of nimitta. One is the wheel, and whatever instruments the potter uses to help shape the pot. They don't transform. Of course, ultimately they transform, but just during the period of making a pot, they don't transform. And then the other nimitta is the potter. He doesn't transform when the pot is being made. He moves his arms and so forth, but makes the wheel spin. So upadan is the clay, and nimitta is the wheel and the instruments, as well as the potter himself. And then there's the ultimate cause, the cause of all causes. So we're going to, this text 16 deals with these two, because the Avadhuta Brahmana is addressing the personality of Godhead as the cause of both nimitta and upadan, and thus creation. The creation is the pot that starts with the clay. And then there's transformations of the clay. It's just a lump, like pradhan, and then it becomes manifest as prakriti, but it's still in that category of upadan. And, the Vedas are very precise. And Jiva Goswami is going to take this verse from Uddhava Gita and have a dancing party. So get ready. Text 16, the Lord of the universe, Narayana, is the worshipable God of all living entities. Without extraneous assistance, the Lord creates this universe by his own potency. And at the time of annihilation, the Lord destroys the universe through his personal expansion of time and withdraws all the cosmos, including all the conditioned living entities within himself. Thus, his unlimited capital S self is the shelter and reservoir of all potencies, spiritual and material. The subtle pradhan, that's the lump of clay, using the metaphor, the basis of all cosmic manifestation, is conserved within the Lord and is in no way different from him. Oh, in this way, excuse me. And is in this way not different from him. No, the oneness and difference understanding. In the aftermath of annihilation, the Lord stands alone. So we discussed this 2 days ago, 2 mornings ago. Now here's Jiva Goswami taking this text and having a nice time with it in Paramatma Sandarbha. So what's Paramatma Sandarbha? One of the 6 Sandarbhas that deals with that aspect of the Supreme Lord, the Paramatma aspect. Of course, it's also Karana, Garbho Dakshay Vishnu, and Shiro Dakshay Vishnu, all 3, dealing with creation. That's the Vishnu function within creation. They deal with Prakriti and creation, maintenance, annihilation. There's a function of Bhagavan in the form of Paramatma. So that's the subject matter of Paramatma Sandarbha. So Jiva Goswami takes this verse and expands. Eko Narayano Deva Purva Shrishtam Sva Mayaya, etc. So he gives the translation, which is quite similar to what we just read. Then, this is it's Anuchad 59. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead displays his own potency in the form of time and guides his material potencies, such as the mode of goodness, into a neutral condition of equilibrium, he remains as the supreme controller of that neutral state called pradhan, as well as of the living entities. He is also the supreme worshipable object for all beings, including liberated souls, demigods, and ordinary conditioned souls. The Lord is eternally free from any material designation, upadhi, and he constitutes the totality of spiritual bliss, which one experiences by seeing the Lord's spiritual form. The Lord thus exhibits the full meaning of the word liberation. No, that was the translation of the next 2 verses. That's 17, 18, like you see on the screen. That was a direct translation of Avadhuta Brahman, or Krishna speaking to Uddhava. Here's text 19. O subduer of the enemies, at the time of creation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead expands his own transcendental potency in the form of time and agitating his material energy, Maya, composed of the 3 modes of material nature, he creates the Mahatattva. Now this subject matter is covered several times in the Bhagavatam, which tells us it's important, although it's a little complicated. It's in Canto 2, it's in Canto 3. Here it is again in Canto 11. So it's important. The process of creation and the Lord's function in relation to it, and our relation to him in relation to creation. So those were, we just read 4 verses from, without commentary yet, from Uddhava Gita, 16 through 19. Now here's the commentary. According to great sages, that which is the basis of the 3 modes of material nature and which manifests the variegated universe is called Sutra or Mahatattva. Indeed, this universe is resting within that Mahatattva, and due to its potency, the living entity undergoes material existence. Next. Just as from within himself the spider expands thread through his mouth, plays for it for some time, and eventually swallows it, similarly, the Supreme Personality Godhead expands his personal potency from within himself. Thus, the Lord displays the network of cosmic manifestation, utilizes it according to his purpose, and eventually withdraws it completely within himself. In this way, the Maya potency, of which time is a part, is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, that's an important truth or tattva in relation to Lord Vishnu, in this case, Paramatma, or as Paramatma Sandarbha, or Mahavishnu, Garbhadakshay Vishnu, and Kshirodakshay Vishnu, all 3. It's our sambandha, our relationship with the source. In the same Sandarbha, and somewhat later, it was said that the subtle and gross universal forms were created by Maya. Subtle and gross universal forms were created by Maya. Maya Shrishte, Bhagavatam 2:10, 35. 2:10, the 10th chapter of Canto 2, deals with the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, correct? The first 2 verses in chapter 10 are Shukadeva Goswami stating what are the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, and the rest of the chapter is expanding in principle those 10 topics. And in the matter of creation, here's this statement is being made. Maya Shrishte, both, so there's a subtle form of the universal form, and there's a gross manifestation of the universal form. We don't regularly see the subtle form, but there's a subtle form. And both are created by Maya. The word Maya does not mean ignorance in this case. This would mean that Brahman becomes everything, parentheses, duality with jivas, etc., out of ignorance. The Lord, because, so we're not Mayavadis. That's what that sentence says. The Lord, who is knowledge itself, full of good qualities, devoid of anything else, and devoid of false ego, cannot be the shelter of ignorance. Nor can he be the object of another's ignorance. Nor can he be the cause of mistakes. But there is ignorance, and there are mistakes, and there is false ego. So what's the shelter of those? Since he is a most astonishing entity, he must have inconceivable Shakti, as seen in a Chintamani, touchstone. The spiritual world is made of touchstones. By that Shakti, his Chintamani Shakti, or spiritual Shakti, just as a medicine destroys sickness, he has limbs, though he has no limbs, since he possesses mutual contradictory qualities in himself. Now, there's another section. It's in Bhagavad Sandarbha. Very fascinating, very compelling, where he expands on that statement. Within Bhagavan, there is the harmonizing of all opposites. Say it again. Everything that exists is within the source of everything. So in everything, there's opposites. So the Lord is the harmonizer of those opposites. They're within him, and they're not contradicting each other. They're harmonized within him. We see contradictions because we don't see him. We see Maya, so we see contradictions. He doesn't expand on that here. He's just making the statement and expands on it elsewhere. But so the example is, as medicine has the effect of destroying disease or sickness, he can destroy, duality and our sense of contradiction. He has that power. And therefore, for example, he has no limbs, but he has no limbs, etc. There is proof of the Lord's inconceivable Shakti. Now he's making some declaration, then he's going to give scriptural support for his declarations. That's his system. He gives a quote from Svetashvatara Upanishad. The eternal Lord has astonishing Shakti. No one else has such Shakti. Two more references. One is Canto 3, chapter 33. Atmeshvaro Tarkya Sahasra Shakti. The Lord of the Jivas has thousands of inconceivable Shaktis. And from Vedanta Sutra 2.128. Atmani Chaivam Vichitrascha Hi. Or, as various marvelous creations arise from desired trees or Chintamani, according to authorities, so we can believe from Scripture that various creations arise from the Lord. The Puranas confirm this. Now, that's a very interesting translation for that short sutra. One should not one should not image or imagine ignorance in the Lord in order to avoid duality. He's, dealing with Mayavadis. Mayavadis say, what they say? The Lord, or Ishvara, is Brahman covered by ignorance. So he's refuting. One should not imagine ignorance in the Lord in order to avoid duality, since ignorance covering the Lord is impossible. Because the Lord possesses inconceivable Shakti, and scriptures testify to this, the difficulty in explaining duality is removed. What's that? Duality is what exists separate from the Lord, nothing. So it's non-dual. But his Shaktis are connected to him. He's explaining philosophically Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. And there he's emphasizing the oneness aspect right now. But they're also different. Shakti and Shaktiman are different. That inconceivable Shakti makes duality easy to explain. Though Paramatma exists with an unchanging nature, by his inconceivable Shakti, he is able to transform into the shape of the universe. It is just like the Chintamani, which produces objects, or a magnet which moves iron. Badarayana accepts this, that's Shukadev. Shrutes tu shabda mulatvat. The defects of the agent do not apply to Brahman because of scriptural statements, which are the only proof concerning inconceivable subjects. Paragraph. He's explaining a concept that the possessor of Shakti that's inconceivable has a oneness and difference feature between himself and that which comes from his Shaktis. You know, the first of the Chaturashloki verses, Ahameva sameva agre, meaning before creation I alone exist, during cosmic manifestation I alone exist, after cosmic annihilation I alone exist. That's the oneness feature. And the Shaktis are inconceivably they're inconceivable. Our little binary processor can't understand that which is inconceivable. But he's explaining the inconceivable. Since he is the root, it is not false to say that Paramatma acts as the material cause. Like Advaitacharya is said to be the material cause. And if you don't understand what Paramatma Sandarbha is saying, you wonder, how is Mahavishnu or Advaitacharya the material cause? In the 11th canto, it is said, now this is chapter 9, he's going to make reference to chapter 24, still Uddhava Gita. Prakriti is the material cause, the Purusha is the foundational cause, like the potter. And then there's Prakriti, that's the clay. Time, the indirect cause, is the agitator of Prakriti. I am all three, Krishna is saying to Uddhava. So there's the oneness aspect. There's difference, and there's a oneness because they're connected to the source. Thus, sometimes Prakriti is called the material cause, and sometimes the Lord is called the material cause. Now we're going to go into these upadan and nimitta terms. The Shakti is transformed. The Shakti of transformation is called Maya, is of two types. One, the nimitta portion called Maya, and the upadan portion called pradhan. The pure Shakti is the nimitta, and the Shakti endowed with vyuha. We're familiar with the Chatra Vyuha, right? Chatra Vyuha. So the Vyuha means expansion. I'll read the sentence again. The pure Shakti is the nimitta, and Shakti endowed with Vyuha or expansion is the upadan. Therefore, sometimes Maya is also said to be unconscious, referring to upadan, like the clay or the pot. Vijnanam cha. It is both knowledge and ignorance. Taittiriya Upanishad. So, depending upon context, one term can mean two different things. We already know that Atma can mean multiple things. Body, mind, and soul, depending upon context. So the Maya terminology or material cause terminology can be understood differently, conscious and not conscious. There's the Vishnu form that's certainly conscious, and the pradhan form that's not. There's a material cause of a pot. You got to have clay. Otherwise, so it's a material cause. Vishnu is also a material cause, but in a different sense. Okay. In the basic authority Bhagavatam, which deals with the creation in the third canto as the main subject, the work describes, as the Bhagavatam, describes transformation of pradhan rather than the Lord. So that which is transformed, that's upadan, the clay. So that's prakriti. That aspect of prakriti is transformed. But the Lord isn't transformed. So pradhan is transformed and the Lord isn't transformed. As the material cause, rather pradhan rather than the Lord as the material cause, because it speaks from the point of view of jnana and vairagya, in coordination with the general view of other Puranas. Similarly, in the Shrutis, Vivarta is a term that Mayavadis like. What is the Lord? Well, it's Vivarta. It's a superimposition upon Brahman. That's what the Lord is. Vivarta. Illusory appearance of Brahman as the world or the Lord's form, etc. Superimposition of something on Brahman. So that's what this world is. That doesn't exist. It's to Vivarta. It's a what exists is Brahman. So he's rejecting that idea or disproving that idea, arguing against the idea. In some Shrutis, Vivarta is described as an anga of jnana and vairagya. This does not mean, however, that the world is actually false. It means, however, that there is a wrong attribution of the samasti, or the universal form, and vyasti, individual body, real entities produced by a transformation of pradhan, which is a vyuha or expansion of Paramatma, to Paramatma, or perhaps his portion, the Atma, because of identifying the person with what it possesses. Hearing descriptions of the universal form related to Paramatma, one could transform the creatorship to the Atma. I warned you, philosophy. But this is Sambandha Gyan, is to help us understand our relationship with the world around us and the Supreme Lord who created the world around us while it exists and after it's existing. There's an echo, right? That's going to take care of it. It's still echo. Aradita. There's still an echo. If you want a lesson in defeating Mayavad philosophy, that's what you're getting. And if you want stories, we'll just dial back to yesterday and we'll tell the story of Ramachandra. But there's Sambandha Gyan to properly understand the activities of the Lord, including the activities of creation. As mentioned, it's in the Bhagavatam several times. And that tells us it's important. Should I speak and it's still kind of echo? I can just turn it off. I'll turn it off. Echo's gone. Fantastic. We'll find out what the problem is later. Mayavad philosophy has this whole complicated way of explaining form of the cosmos is false, jagat mithya. Then you have to look at, well, what does mithya mean? It's a whole thing. He's speaking against it. The cosmos is real. What it is a transformation of the Lord's Prakriti. There's a relationship of oneness with his Prakriti or his Shakti, spiritual and material. Some of it undergoes transformation for the purpose of creation. And Vishnu, it is also a material cause, but he doesn't undergo transformation. And then after some time, by the time energy enters into him, the state of oneness once again. It's a state of oneness outside, it's a state of oneness within. So we'll carry on. Attributing one object to be in another place is false. Like mistaking a shell for silver. You know, a shell, sometimes you see the shiny thing inside an oyster shell, but it's not silver. It looks like. So, mistaking one thing for another thing. Silver is in the shell of an oyster. That's a mistake. However, Vivartavad mistakes an object to be something else which has no existence, because silver exists and oyster shells exist. To say it's false is not correct. It's just a mistake. It's a further mistake to say that it doesn't even exist. That's what he's saying. The world is false. It doesn't exist. Mithya. That's a bigger mistake. Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. It is something like attributing a flower floating in the sky. That is impossible. Pushpa Akash, we've heard that. There are also no examples of illusion based on illusion to infinity. Paragraph. From seeing water previously, a form of water develops in the mind. It remains dormant in unrelated circumstances. On seeing an object similar to water, that form awakens. Without searching out particles of water, one mistakes the object for water. Water is not false, nor is the form in the memory, nor is an object like a mirage false. However, attributing something to be non-different from a recollected object is false, since it is not the actual object seen. Clear? Okay. In paragraph, in dreams with forms, so he's saying a dream isn't false either. It's not what it appears to be, but it's something. And it's a memory of something. That's what a dream is. And that's something that you're memorying, that's also real. Anyway, in dreams with forms of objects seen in a waking state, held in mind, the Maya of Paramatma makes one identify it with an external object, but the dream object is not false. From Vedanta Sutra, Maya matram tu karsnyena ana bhivyakta swarupavat. The cause is the Lord's Maya, because the dreams by nature are not revealed to everyone. Unquote. Thus, though mistaking the universe for the pure Atma or Paramatma is false, the universe is not false. Thinking of the world as Paramatma is for unintelligent people, since the universe is not directly the Lord being produced from him, since it is not directly his place, unlike Vaikuntha. Though the Lord dwells in the world, he is not touched by it. It is said from Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 13, Asaktam sarva brich chaiva. He is unattached, but maintains everything. 13:15 Bhagavad-Gita. In scriptures such as Vishnu Purana, the false identity of a person with his body or house is described. Or Bhagavatam says, 10:14-27, that's Brahma's prayers, 10:14. Considering that you, Paramatma, to be an ordinary jiva, a person seeks you, not in Vrindavan, but internally, as merely the jiva. We're at 8:15 already. It's quite a bit more. We'll have to continue another day. So we're still, we didn't even get to 17. I mean, that's what this said on the screen, but we're still on 16, and tomorrow it's going to be continuing with 16. So let's go back to Uddhava Gita, or the context. All of these verses for 2.5 chapters are dedicated to Krishna explaining to Uddhava the principle of knowledge and detachment for the sake of removing obstacles in our relationship with Krishna, so we can actually understand Krishna and be in our relationship with Krishna. There's an obstacle, and the obstacle is attachment. Material attachment is a form of Maya. So after all these different examples that the Avadhuta Brahmana has learned knowledge and detachment from, he's now reaching the punchline, and that is the absolute truth. How to be properly detached needs guidance, because detachment can say it doesn't exist. That's the Mayavadi approach. And similarly, the Buddhist approach. It doesn't exist, it's false. No, so I'm not going to be attached to that which doesn't exist. And by knowledge, that kind of detachment, false, Palgu Vairagya. But then there's another kind of detachment that's possible, and that's attachment to Krishna by seeing everything, whatever is out there, everything, with a mood of detachment. Doesn't mean you're detached from Krishna. I mean, my thought is going to, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm getting these reports from people who are in India, and so many people have COVID now. There's a rash of COVID in Mayapur and different parts of India. It's like, and every day you open up my computer and so-and-so their whole family has COVID. Pankajangri and this one, that one, the other one in Mayapur. So how to be detached when somebody's suffering and they may expire, and so they're getting all of that stuff. Hospitals are full, and all the other stuff that's going on that causes people to be like disturbed. And the disturbance itself is a symptom of forgetfulness of Krishna. Doesn't mean that people having COVID is just hunky-dory. We're just fine with it. We don't mind, shrug our shoulders and move on. We deal with it. Whatever the other things are that are causes of disturbance, without making a long list. There's disturbance in this world. No one's free from disturbance in this world. And it doesn't work just by calling it false. So what works? And what works for the Avadhuta Brahman is knowledge of detachment that leads to attachment to the personality of Godhead, and thus seeing all things that he, in the less mature stage, he was seeing lessons from the fish and lessons from the bumblebee and lessons from the sky and from the mountains and, the world around him. Knowledge and detachment is attachment to the personality of God and seeing in right perspective. So Jiva Goswami is taking the trouble to educate his reader from this statement of the Avadhuta Brahman to understand the relationship between the Shaktis of the Lord and the Lord of those Shaktis. They're his Shaktis, in that sense, none different. They undergo transformation, but he doesn't. And when it's over, it's wound back into him. So what's important? The temporary, that which is being forever transformed, which we're very attached to. The configuration of the temporary at the moment, and then it changes, and then it changes, and then it changes. So that's the philosophy. We want to become attached to the Lord. And then comes the challenges of life, like hardship. And, someone steps on your toe or something. Someone dear to you has COVID and they're struggling for their life, and so many other things. And it's the pot is being stirred. It's Kali Yuga, and things are really wild, without listing anecdotal evidence that things are wild. Now, how do you pass through that as a transcendentalist and be detached? It's a display of the Lord Shakti. Simple. It's a display of the Lord Shakti. We don't call it false. It's temporary. And it's a manifestation of the modes of nature and karma through the Lord's consent or sanction, anumantacha. And we keep our attention fixed upon the Supreme Lord. That's what Uddhava is asking, that picture that he's at Krishna's feet. He wants his attachment to be withdrawn so he can stay fixed. So all of this is to help Uddhava achieve that, which means to help us achieve that. Try to be attached to the Lord if you don't have a proper understanding of his Shaktis. Good luck. You're going to get tossed around. It happens. It happens. And so knowledge will help. It's not the conclusion. Knowledge and detachment will help. It's not the conclusion. Attachment to the Supreme Lord in devotion and serving him, that is. We have our bhakti process, starting with chanting and hearing, to help us become attached to the Supreme Lord. And we have our teachings to help us also become detached from that which we're attached to, so that we can take proper shelter of transcendence. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow. Heavy philosophy, but part of the Bhagavatam. Let's see if there's some discussion. Nobody fell asleep, at least.
Hare Krishna Gurudeva. Thank you for the class. They were just, I understand that when you mentioned gross and subtle forms of universal form are actually Maya.
They're manifestations of Maya, yes?
Is it because it's near to Devi Dham, or I just try to understand?
Your question specifically, is it Maya because it's near to Devi Dham?
Yeah, I'm trying to
That's
understand.
That's your question.
Yes.
Well, it's not near to Devi Dham, it is Devi Dham. And it's Devi Dham means the external energy. And there are different names for the stages of that external energy. Here's a few: Pradhan, Mahatattva, Prakriti. There's a few. Maya, Guna. So there's different features of that external, but it is the Lord's external energy or the Maya potency. Okay?
So universal form is also Maya then?
It's temporary. It's manifest by the agency of Maya. Now, in other words, it's not eternal. It's temporary. It's not eternal. It's one of the Lord's. The universal form is a very delicate topic to try to understand. What to speak of, explain it. It's a real form, but it's illusory in the sense that it's temporary.
So we are all eternal, like individual soul is an eternal.
That's right.
But the combination of individual souls into a universal form is not eternal.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Like, because one of the descriptions of the universal form, there's several, is the head, the arms, the torso, and the legs. Then the varnashram system is part of is one of the features of the universal form, and etc. Upper, middle, lower planetary systems, etc. It's a real form, subtle and gross, and it's temporary. Anything else? Srila Prabhupada ki. Oh, we have something online.
Question from Ananda Vrindavan Devi Dasi.
Okay.
Do we have to work on detachment in a conscious way, or will we just by cultivating attachment to Krishna, detachment to things all temporary, develop by itself?
That's a nice question. It's both answers are correct depending upon how you mean either of those answers, or saying the same thing differently. It's automatic, but not mechanical. By attachment to Krishna, when you're standing in the light, darkness is dissipated. So in that sense, automatic. But to stand in the light, you have to let go of the darkness. So there's some effort in letting go of the darkness in order to be standing in the light. Because the tendency is being in darkness, the conditioned tendency. So you can make the statement either way, but it depends on how you mean the statement, what your understanding of the statement. Just become attached to Krishna and everything is nice.
Another comment she made to that was, my recent experience with COVID made me realize how deep and body-based my attachments are.
How deep?
And body-based. My attachments.
How deep and what?
Body-based.
Bonded?
Body. Body-based.
How severe the disease is? Is that what she's saying?
No, I think she's saying how she realized how her attachments were more material?
Oh, okay. Her whole family was diagnosed with COVID, including her father and her son. They all recovered slowly, but so that's where that question is coming from. Next.
Next question is from Snehavali Devidasi. In the beginning of the commentary, JG, JG,
I can't follow. Do you follow?
are you aware? Jiva Goswami, okay. In the beginning of the commentary,
JG is Jiva
Jiva
Goswami, yes. Okay.
In the beginning of the commentary, Jiva Goswami, while defeating Mayavada philosophy, mentioned that Brahman covered with ignorance is the Supreme Lord. We have heard previously that Brahman covered with knowledge is supreme, and Brahman covered with ignorance is the living entity as per Mayavada philosophy. Could you please comment?
Yeah. It's language. Covered with knowledge. Brahman covered with knowledge. It has to do with the modes of nature. It's Brahman covered, period. That's the Vivartavad doctrine of the Mayavadis. And whether you say covered Vivarta is covered with ignorance or covered with knowledge is covered. Again, in different contexts, different statements may be made. It doesn't mean if this one's right, then that one's wrong. If that one's right, then this one is wrong. It's context specific. Covered. Just go with that. Covered by what? Covered by that which doesn't exist. That's their whole teaching. Knowledge doesn't exist. Ignorance doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is Brahman. So you can say covered with what? You give different bad names to something. Covered by Maya. And Maya has different features. So living entities are less covered by ignorance. The Supreme Lord is, living entities are more covered by ignorance. The Supreme Lord is less covered by ignorance, or we'll call it goodness. It amounts to the same thing. Next. That's it. Prabhupada ki jai.